Well, into our post OTA best decks roundup today. Red Hulk is going to be appearing in 6 of our 15 deck lists. So while it is down a little bit from its 2 power nerf, it is certainly not out. Let's go ahead and dive on into all of the juicy details, shall we? My first Jeff's pick today is an updated take on Angela Dack in Destroy that I used to climb to Infinite at the start of the season. This deck list is one of my favorite types of ways to play Marvel Snap. It has a lot of individually powerful cards that also have some clean overlapping synergies with each other. We have Angela, for example, who we can play 1 energy cards out into her path, including Dack and Smaramasa Shard, and then we can use Killmonger to blow those away before we deploy even more cards to her lane. Mysterio not only triggers Angela with one of her clones, but also lets Mockingbird become a 2/9 all on its own. And then we round out the deck list with a variety of potent tech cards such as Shang-Chi, Mobius, and Red Guardian to disrupt whatever our opponents are bringing to the table. My second just pick this week is a deck I like to call Little Movers. It is a lower to the ground variation of the Angela Kitty Pryde Craven deck that has scaling threats, which instead of topping off in powerful 5 and 6 drop cards powered out by Hope, features Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, and Enchantress as powerful 4 drops that we can close on to cover all the lanes simultaneously or interact with whatever our opponent is bringing to the board in a profitable manner. This deck list has a ton of cards that move around the board, as the name implies. Nightcrawler, Jeff, Silk, and Spider-Man all play into Angela's path and then can cleanly move into Craven's path, powering up both of our 2 energy scalers. We round out our last slots with a copy of Mobius to be disruptive and Miles Morales as a 1/5 that doesn't die to opposing copies of Killmonger. We kick off our high potential category this week, decks that have low sample sizes but impressive metrics so far, with a very innovative Super Giant control deck. I think Super Giant is really well positioned in the metagame. There's a lot of big things players are looking to do on turn 5 that she disrupts, whether it's stopping a Nihilist from kicking a Void over, giving you an extra turn to fill up your right side location, making a MODOK wait so you can perfectly Cosmo it wherever it's at on the board before it flips up at the end, or simply stopping Professor X from locking down a lane entirely. She really does a lot right now. The controlling elements of this deck really impressed me when I played it, and the Annihilus Sentry Hood package is obviously very powerful when we use it ourselves. I will say the one card I felt kind of awkward / lacking in this list is Ronin. My opponents just pretty consistently got their hands empty if they were playing a deck like Loki, and being a 5 energy card, he felt kind of clunky inside of the Annihilus package. I'm not sure what else exactly I'd recommend playing in that slot, but if I was looking to experiment that improve this list, I think that is where I would start. Our next high potential deck list is a Jean Grey Spectrum list that I have been absolutely loving. This deck list at its core looks to flood the board with cheap ongoing effects that Spectrum powers up on the final turn of the game. I think Jean Grey in particular has fantastic synergy with Cosmo into the current metagame, since there are a lot of powerful 4, 5, and 6 energy cards that need on reveal effects to really leverage their strength. US Agent, Man-Thing, and Luke Cage to make their effects one-sided have really been impressive in this deck list as well. Not only do these cards obviously work well with Jean Grey, forcing your opponent into one path, but Nebula does her best Jean Grey impersonation when played early as well, giving you a lot of control over how stats play out on the board. Unironically, I think Punisher is quite fantastic and powerful in this list. Thanks to Nebula and Jean and all the clutter decks running around, he is regularly a 3/7 that then pumps up to 9 points of power thanks to Spectrum. Our next high potential deck list is a go wide deck top ending Blue Marvel. Squirrel Girl and Shauna both do a phenomenal job of not only letting you play Cull Obsidian out freely, but also making Mockingbird close to free on their own. This deck list also gets to leverage a variety of powerful tech cards with Mobius, Cosmo, and Armor. Armor in particular, in tandem with a deck like this that can fill up the board quickly, I think is really well positioned into the various decks playing Sentry and Annihilus in the metagame. Basically, anytime you're playing into those clutter decks, you want to fill up your right side location as quick as possible with the inclusion of Armor, so that way their Void gets stuck on their side of the board, essentially giving you one location completely for free and letting you focus your other stats from Cull and Mockingbird into somewhere else to pick up the victory. Our final high potential deck list this week is a return to form in the Thor Tech deck. This deck list likes to use its namesake, Thor, Beta Ray Bill, and Jane Foster to establish board presence, and it then closes out the game on the final turn with a variety of interactive cards depending on whatever best messes up your opponent's strategy. Whether it's a Red Guardian plus a Killmonger, a Shang-Chi plus a Quake or Shadow King, or even simply slamming down Miss Marvel to add additional points to the board, this deck's output range is really wide on the last turn of the game, making it difficult for your opponent to predict exactly what you're going to do, netting you some pretty reasonable cube equity. Moving along to our most popular category this week, it's no surprise that our latest card release in White Widow is seeing a ton of play. There are two styles of decks that she's primarily showing up in, the first of which is a Dark Hawk deck with a minor clutter sub theme. I think the Dark Hawk package in particular is really strong in the current metagame. There's a lot of decks like opposing Annihilus decks, for example, or combo decks like Hela that are looking to put together key combinations of certain cards, and cutting them off of one or even two draws over the course of the game often makes them have a much more difficult time at accomplishing this. In addition to those disruptive elements, this deck list also has a variety of ways to put big stats into play, whether it's a Carnage clearing out all of your rocks and hoods, or Mockingbird coming down as a 0/9, or Sentry plus Annihilus putting lots of points out. You have lots of ways to keep your opponent on their toes. The second popular White Widow variations running around right now are more dedicated clutter control decks, whether it's a combination of smaller cards, i.e. White Widow, Green Goblin, and Debris looking to lock up a path, or a powerful 5 energy play such as Professor X or Dr. Octopus locking one up completely on their own. This deck list excels at constricting your opponent's ability to play to the board going into the final turns of the game. This is where Marvel Snap recent All-Star Cannonball often comes slamming into play. You lock up one lane with X or Dr. Octopus, and then Cannonball can slam down on turn 6 or 7 to close out their biggest card in another lane, giving you almost certain victory. The other archetype that's incredibly popular post infinite per untapped play rates is just a classic lockdown variation. I think maybe we could speculate that Storm is perhaps good into these White Widow clutter decks, since there's cards like Jessica Jones allow you to get tempo into her path early, and then Miss Marvel and Doctor Doom give you ways to reach into other places late. I think Doctor Doom in particular is one of the best cards in the game. You can be playing into things like Dr. Octopus because he doesn't condense all of his power into a single location when ripped into play. I think one noteworthy / interesting thing about this deck list is that the best performing and most popular ones are actually still playing Zabu, despite its change to on reveal from ongoing. I don't know if there's potentially something better in that slot and it just hasn't been explored yet, but this is what people are playing per the Untap metrics. Moving along to our top performing category, we kick things off with the Elsa Hope Movers deck that I talked a little bit about during my Jeff's Picks Little Movers section. This deck list goes a little bit bigger than that one, top ending both Vision and Red Hulk, while sharing that small growing cards package of Angela Craven alongside things like Kitty Pryde, Jeff, and Silk that bounce around the board. Up next, we have the Pixie Lady Deathstrike Annihilus shell that really feels like it has become a meta game staple. And I think this deck list is excellent for a variety of reasons. It's got cheap disruptive elements in Spider-Ham, Iceman, and Mobius. It's got big stats from the Annihilus package and Red Hulk. And most importantly, it has an unpredictable output range that can generate massive swings your opponent isn't ready for when Pixie really pops off. One thing that I think is especially noteworthy looking at data surrounding this deck, though, is that this particular list that I have up is the best performing iteration of it, and it features Polaris as opposed to the more popular Red Guardian inside of it. I think I could probably speculate that part of the reason for the higher performance with a card like Polaris is a lot of the decks that Red Guardian was preying on have been pushed out of the format a little bit. Cerebro 2 has fallen off. Things like Living Tribunal, playing Iron Man are mostly nowhere to be seen. So from a game theory perspective, I think it makes sense that a different 3-drop is perhaps a better choice in that slot for the time being. Hela's still a top performing deck. Woo! RNG! Discard your big stuff, loop it back into play, pretend like you played a skillful and interesting game of Marvel Snap, and don't forget to fist bump after the dice fall in your favor, gamers. Destroys a top performing deck. Nothing really noteworthy about the build this week. Artem Zola, the 6-drop of choice at the top end. Blow your cards up for fun and profit and make really big numbers while your Deadpools scale. We have one final category this week since Baron Zemo didn't quite make it into my Jeff's picks or any of the top performing decks in the metagame right now. Per the stats on Untapped, this Loki variation playing Zemo as just a quality 3 energy card that also makes your Mockingbird cheaper has some of the best stats for him in the game currently. Finally, if you're not interested in playing Baron Zemo in the Loki shell, this Mill Control variation is the best performing non-Loki Baron Zemo deck per Untapped metrics as of my recording of this video. You Yondu them, you cable them, you copy those effects with Absorbing Man, you get their deck completely empty, so on the 7th turn of the game they miss their draw after you Dr. Octopus all the remaining cards out of their hand. The deck's not necessarily a performance powerhouse, but it's really obnoxious and certainly pisses people off. All in all, solid sweet roundup of decks this week. Red Hulk is definitely down but not out, and there's a ton of different things that you can play and not feel embarrassed about in the format right now. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown and roundup this week, be sure to snap that like button and also check the video description down below for deck list links for everything covered here, as well as some video links for me playing a couple of these decks on my secondary channel.